vänner Narchen. Talk over good, talk over good, talk over good, talk over good.
I would describe the play as a kind of historical story with a modern storyline throughout it. And it's performed in, not really kind of in a traditional story or a traditional narrative, but it's kind of in little pieces of spoken words all the way through. And there's different layers of different historical times in Scotland. The idea of the play came from an opportunity that I had a couple of years ago for funding. So I was doing an application for funding, which is what you do quite a lot when you're a freelance theatre maker. And the opportunity was to develop a new idea. And the theme was epic. So I'd never really thought of my work as epic before, but I had this story in the back of my head. Someone had mentioned Ossian before, and I didn't really know who Ossian was, and I knew it was some sort of Scottish mythological character or story. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, well, what's epic? What's a kind of epic story that I would want to tell? And I thought maybe this is the time when I research this Ossian character. So I didn't know anything about Ossian. I didn't know anything about James Macpherson, who wrote this original story. So I went right back to the beginning and I learned all of that as I was going. That was the idea for the historical part of the story. And then through looking at the historical story, what James Macpherson had written, the whole mythology around Ossian, I started to think about, well, what's a modern story I can tell alongside this? So I didn't want it to just be historical. I wanted to do something about modern Scotland or modern Scottishness or about how I feel about Scotland today. And so the modern story came from all the historical elements. And I tried to think, well, what would be the modern versions of this and how can I tell a story about contemporary Scotland? So there was quite a lot of development on this, maybe partly because I think it needed it, because it was such a big story to tell. Well, this is what happens, I suppose, when you're just writing something from the beginning and you're devising something. You do need a lot of development before it even gets into a rehearsal room. So there was a whole period where I had this original funding and I developed the story and initial ideas, very sketchy ideas at the beginning, just to see what this could be. And when I came to work at NTS with this project, we started to work on all the other production elements of it. So we did a whole development on music. So music became quite a big part of it with the three singers in the show. So I worked with a composer, Oliver Serrell, and three singers, and we developed ideas for music. He had little sketches, same way you would do with writing, little sketches, little ideas. We tried to put the music together with the script, and we showed that in front of different audiences and different people here at NTS. And then alongside that, I started to develop a wee bit more about what the story could be. We also had a bit of development when the creative team all came on board. So Lou Kemp, the director, and all the designers and lighting designer and videographer and all of that. We had extra development just to see what kind of world it was we wanted to build, just to see the effects that the design would have in that. So even before we got to day one of rehearsal, the script had been through a lot of development, the music had been through a lot of development, and the design had been through a lot of development as well. So it was kind of ready to go. We were in a good place when we started rehearsals. It meant we could just get going with blocking and rehearsing the actual show because we'd had all that time to work out all the other parts of it. I had written this story and I'd written these layers, the historical part, the modern part, and this mythological Ossian part. So that was all there. But I suppose the moment you start to bring this to other people, when you start to have conversations with the director, then you need more things to that. You're thinking, well, is this story very clear? Are there still gaps there? Even when you bring the script into the room, it's like, well, actually, maybe I don't need to say that because the design's saying that. So once you start to add all the production elements, then your script can really change. One thing we did was we invited audiences in every Friday, and that was a massive thing. They'd watch our rehearsal and what we'd done up to that point, and Lou, the director, would ask the audience, did you understand that? Is there anything we're missing? Are there any gaps? And from their feedback, we did start to really change bits of the script. And at one point, I chopped a lot out of the script because when I was reading it in front of an audience for the first time, I thought, oh yeah, this is too long. I've said this already. This isn't really relevant. So we started to trim things as we went along. So I suppose one of the biggest changes was really just how you work with the script when you have all those other production elements in the room. Well, as a writer and performer, right, so there's two things that happen. You write the script and it looks good on the page, or you're happy with it, or it goes through a bit of development with people that you're working with, and you say, right, I'll write that line there and I'll do that line. And you look at it and you read it, and when you're reading on the page, your voice is in your head, and so you think that's fine. But the minute you stand up and then read that out, it's a completely different thing. So that's just something to think about, you know, when you're writing. Are you writing a novel, for example, or prose that people are going to read and it's in their mind, or is it something to be said and heard? And those are two very, very different things. So again, that's why I started to cut a lot of things out, because I thought, well, that doesn't sound right in my voice, or it doesn't sound right saying that to an audience, or I could do that in a better way. One voice that's in there is a kind of Scots voice, a modern Scottish me as a Glaswegian voice, and that's me talking to the audience. So that's really how the story starts. I just talk to the audience. I say, well, I've read this book. I found it quite interesting. I didn't know about it. Did you know about it? And then they all say yes or no. And it's a very kind of familiar back and forth with the audience. So that's really nice. The show doesn't continue like that, but I think there is still that sense that I'm talking to the audience in a very informal way. So I wanted to keep that all the way through it. There's something for me which is like, the audience is here, I'm here, let's not pretend that we're not there. So I just wanted to keep talking to them. So that was definitely a style that I wanted to keep through it. Then there was the style which came from the book. The original source material that was written in the 1700s is very kind of old-fashioned kind of writing. And so it was hard for me to find my voice in that. Am I reading it? Am I me? Am I supposed to be James McPherson? Am I the voice of some mythological character? So that was a hard one to try and work out what that voice was. And there's another thing that happens when you're doing historical stuff. You don't want to be like a teacher voice or like the voice of authority or something. So I never wanted to be that kind of voice or that character. So again, I'm trying to think, well, how do I just tell it? And how do I tell these stories, or how do I do these poems just in a very informal, conversational way? Even when you're dealing with something that's really historical or really complicated, how can you just make it really easy and conversational? So James McPherson, the story that he told wasn't true. And so again, I was trying to think, well, what's a modern version of what he was doing? And so I kind of landed on this idea that maybe I wouldn't be completely truthful, or I would create a version of myself. Now that came about in a few ways. One way that came about was because at the very, very beginning, I created a character, a modern character, and I called him Jamie to be a contemporary James. And so I was talking about James and what he did in the 1700s, and I spoke about Jamie and what he did in the 1990s and the 2000s. And quite late on in the development, I decided to change that character and not make him a third person, but make him a first person. And I said me and I for that story instead in that character. But what happened was, it wasn't really me, because I had written this character, but I'd put lots and lots of autobiographical parts into that character. So when it came to me saying that this happened to me, there was lots of fiction mixed up with all the reality. I thought that was really interesting, so I stuck with it, because I wanted to make something that was biographical, but still had elements of fiction in it. And so at the very end of the play, I kind of reveal that to the audience, just in the same way that James wasn't particularly truthful with everything he'd written, I also was a wee bit untruthful tonight. But does it matter? And is that interesting? And you know, what does that make you think of? So yeah, I was being a bit cheeky with the audience about that. And I think some people were a bit mad that this story that they started to believe actually wasn't true. But what I say is, the story wasn't true, but it was still a real story, because it had lots of me in it. It had lots of my experience in it, lots of my feelings in it. So it's still true in a way. I started learning Gaelic a couple of years ago, and I started to write more plays and do more poetry with Gaelic elements in them as I was learning it. And I've always been interested in Gaelic and Scots languages, and other languages actually, because for me it's all about, again, writing from your own experience, writing in your own voice, what that might mean. And so when I came across this story, James McPherson in the 1700s wrote this book, and he put it out there, and he said that this was an old, authentic, historical piece from the year 300, and he had discovered it, and he had translated it from the original kind of old Gaelic into English. So that was something he claimed, but there was never any old Gaelic, because he was kind of constructing this whole thing. There was never any Gaelic original. So that was really interesting as part of that story. So again, thinking of the modern story, what I could write about Scotland today, well, there was this element of Gaelic being used and Gaelic being translated, and I thought, well, what can I say about Gaelic today? And being a learner, I suppose I had this kind of unique view on Gaelic where I could see it as a kind of outsider. I could see it as this part of our history that's been kind of marginalised, and it's been treated really badly, actually, to the point where very few people in Scotland are now speaking it. But also it has this reputation for being backwards. It has this reputation for being not needed. It's something that should just be forgotten about. It should be something that shouldn't be supported. So there's all of that around it, very political and very complicated chat around Gaelic. So of course I'm thinking, yes, well, I want to explore that and I want to bring that in, because that's the modern version of what Gaelic is. That's what Gaelic is today. And so I knew I wanted there to be a Gaelic element in the story. I wanted to think about, well, how can we tell this story that James was doing, but what if we were to do it in Gaelic? What if we were to think about that early Gaelic version of the stories, these real myths that probably would have existed back then anyway? And so I went through the book and I took out little chunks of the original writing, and I had a wee go at translating that into Gaelic just to see what that would look like. We did have Alistair White, who was our Gaelic consultant, who sorted all that out afterwards, which was really good. But that was really trying to take James's work and saying, well, if he said it was an authentic Gaelic back in the day, maybe we've got this opportunity to put it in Gaelic and see what that looked like. So in the show, when I open the book and I start reading from the book, that's when the singers come on, that's when the Gaelic element comes into it, because it's really connected to the stories that he was telling. And so all the way through our Gaelic songs, they're there as a kind of reminder of history or a reminder of what James was talking about. And at first it felt like Gaelic was very much in the past. And that was something we didn't want. We didn't want it to just be Gaelic to be some sort of museum piece or historical piece. And so throughout the development, I decided, well, I wanted to have this modern character find his Gaelic voice again and have it in the present day. And that's when my character writes the story to his grandfather to try and have this connection to the past, but have it very much in the present, that this person is speaking Gaelic today. I suppose on the back of that, the singers then kind of come on and they sing more modern Gaelic songs at the end, and that's how we finish it. We try to bring Gaelic right up to date into the present day. So the Gaelic thing for me was like a whole journey throughout it, and trying to get that balance right was a bit difficult sometimes in rehearsals and in the script, how the music and the text fitted together, but that was really about how the Gaelic and the Scots sits together as well. So it wasn't easy, and I think there's still lots of work to do in that, and I think there's more projects we can do when it comes to Gaelic and Scots and English, but for me it was really important to have Gaelic, Scots and English in the same place at the same time. The songs were there because of the Gaelic and because of the original writing, so that was why they were there. That's why I wrote them into the script. But I suppose when you get it on its feet, it's difficult. And I think it was difficult from Lou's point of view. From a directing point of view was, well, Martin's just walked on stage and Martin's talking to the audience, and then we have these singers come in. So Lou was very concerned about, who are these singers? Where do they come from? What world do they inhabit? What do they look like? How do they interact with Martin? I mean, these are questions, again, just from writing in the script that I wasn't really thinking about. I was just placing songs and text together. But for Lou, it's her role to create this world and to make it make sense in some way. So we really had to think about all those questions of why there was these three singers in this story that we were telling. And again, we were thinking of coming from history and being in the present. There are certain moments in the play where I'm very separate from the singers and they're very much in one world and I'm in another. There are moments when it feels like maybe the singers are trying to tell me something or communicate with me in some way, but maybe I don't see them. And there are some times when I start to see the singers and their worlds start to come together. So it was really a process of trying to figure out how these things work together. But that, I suppose that was also within the design, within the direction of the piece as well. That was something we had to work out as we went along in rehearsals. But I really enjoyed that as a performer. I really enjoyed, because I normally do solo work, so actually having people on stage with me was really, really nice. And so I liked that we would have moments where I could look across the stage and I would see the singers, or we would connect together, or I was reading the Gaelic letter at the end and they were very much part of it. I would talk to them, I would have conversations with them, they would sing with the text, and it was very much together. So it was really enjoyable having people on stage to interact with. And I think, yeah, the elements all coming together in the performance were really important.
naturlichen Ohr.
So there's a historical theme, obviously. There's a lot about Scottish history in this, and I suppose I question a wee bit about Scottish history. Why didn't I know this story? Why don't we know this story? Nobody knows who James Macpherson was. He's not really spoken about anymore, so there was a big historical umbrella over the whole thing. And if you've seen the show, if you've seen any images of it, one of the big themes, obviously, is Scottishness. So we had tartan all through it, and we had stags and thistles, and we were playing with all those stereotypes. So Scottishness and what is your Scottish culture and what is your cultural identity, that was all part of it as well. So those were the big broad themes, were kind of Scottish history and Scottish culture. I think once you start with that, then you can look at lots of themes, smaller themes in between, and the modern story had other themes of family and maybe feeling a bit displaced or feeling that you're not connected to family or not connected to culture, even though we're in this very tartan set. There was this disconnect. Language was a big theme. Language and being performed through poetry was a way of kind of exploring that through language and through poetry and through storytelling. And then in the modern story, there was a lot of themes of what a man is, or being a young man, or trying to make your way through the world as a man and masculinity. That was all there. And that came from early development of the original story was set at a time when people were fighting a lot. So it was about clans and tribes and all of that. And so I was thinking a wee bit about, well, what's that modern version of that? How can I tell this story of this young man who's trying to navigate all of this? So even though we had these broad themes, I was kind of picking on a lot of little themes in between as well. It's relevant today because we have to look at historical context. So again, if people didn't know this story, this historical story, if it's not something we're told or taught, well, why is that? You know, what is it about this story? Why don't we know about it? Why don't we know aspects of our Scottish history? Why are there things that we aren't taught in school? Like, I was never really taught a lot about Scottish history in school. I'm learning as an adult as I go along now. So I think that's very relevant, and I think really questioning that, why don't we know these things? And I think having the modern story in there as well, again, about the place of Gaelic in today's Scotland, or the place of history in today's Scotland. Yeah, I think these stories are really relevant, and I think that there was a lot of questions in this play. I asked a lot of questions. I was throwing it back at the audience a lot to say, well, can you imagine that? Or imagine if that happened? Or what's the point in this? Or what if this happened? So I was really just kind of being a bit provocative, actually, and throwing it back to the audience, and hopefully the audience were thinking, oh yeah, why don't I know that? Or why don't I know about this? And it was really important to try and root it in Scotland today and not make it just a piece about history. I hope they have a sense of like learning something new, not in a kind of, educational way or coming to some sort of boring talk. I just mean that I would hope that they would come and they would learn something that they didn't know before. And that's kind of enough in one way, but all the other themes and all the other stories that came off of this about storytelling, or what the voice is, or who's got the right to tell stories, or why are certain stories told and certain stories aren't, and is that stag a cliche or is it a useful thing, and him coming on dressed in tartan, is that a pure cringe, is that an embarrassment, or is it something I'm proud of? So all the other elements that come off it, I would hope that there would be certain things in there that people would relate to or resonate with or question as well. So I would hope that people would go away and just think, well, what's my relationship to Scotland? What's my relationship to my language? Are there aspects of my family's life that I don't know about? Are there parts of history that I need to learn more about as well? And maybe, should I go off and should I learn Gaelic? That would be nice as well.
Talk about good.